This topic is on the methods of sex research. We want the scientific method because that is the most accurate. To begin with that one, you form a research question. So, for example, let's say we wanted to know how many of Garden City Community College students actually are choosing to abstain. So we'd form our hypothesis, which is basically an educated guess. So we might say 10% or 50%. We just make a guess. Then we go out and test our hypothesis, and we're going to learn the different ways to gather data to test that hypothesis. Then once you run your study, you draw your conclusions. Two words that we need to understand the difference between is description and inference. To describe, it's the actual event. To infer, it's your conclusion or opinion. Let's use the example, what if I came into class and said, as I was coming into the classroom, walking down the hall, I saw two guys holding hands. And then I would ask my class to repeat what I just said. So what did I just say? My hypothesis is that 90% of the time, somebody's going to say that I saw two gay guys. Nope, I didn't see two gay guys. I saw a father with his little boy walking down the hall. So to describe the actual event, if I ask that question, saw two guys holding hands. To infer is when you put your personal opinion, your conclusion, what you think I said. Athletes probably are one of the most inferred groups. I always ask my athletes how many of them have read about themselves in the paper, and most of them have, and I ask them if everything that they've read is accurate, and most of the time they say it isn't. It's because the person writing about what they saw is writing their own personal opinion or conclusion, what they saw. Even refs don't always see things accurately. We need to select our population sample. The best way to do this is to randomly determine your sample, and it should be representative of the target population. So earlier in my question, we want to know how many Garden City Community College students are abstaining. That would be the target population of Garden City Community College students. Now, stratified random sample means that each ethnic group is equally represented. Let's say I have a class that's 50% Hispanic, 40% white, and 10% black. If we put everybody into a hat and randomly pulled out 50%, there would be a chance that none of the black population would be pulled out because there's only 10% of them. So they wouldn't feel like their ethnic group is equally represented. So to make it stratified, what you need to do is put each ethnic group in their own hat. So you put the Hispanics, the whites, and the blacks each in their own hat, and then pull out 50% of each group. That makes it stratified. Volunteer bias. When it comes to sex research, not everybody is willing to participate. You have those that are conservative that wouldn't even think about participating in a study, and you might have some that are very, very open and they would be very willing. Well, would the two groups represent their population accurately? Probably not. Also, is everybody going to be honest? Many will underreport or exaggerate. And then there's the fear of anonymity. Some people won't want to participate because they're going to be fearful that others are going to find out about their behavior. Here's an example of a research question. What are the average person's attitudes toward victims of rape? So we're going to use the survey method. So we're going to randomly pull our sample to get as little bias as possible. So we'll go to state universities, we'll go to private liberal arts colleges. Not everybody goes to college, so we'll go to the shopping mall, we'll go to women's organizations, we'll go to students in a human sexuality course, and religious studies students. Now I see a big problem with this. I do not see a men's organization represented. And if you're going to do opposites of all the others, then you should do opposites of that as well. However, today probably there are women in men's organizations. All right, here's the different ways we can pull data. We can do surveys. Face-to-face is an excellent one. You do have to have trained interviewers. The reason for that is because if an interviewer is face-to-face with somebody that they're gathering data on, and let's say they're asking them how many times they had sex in the last week, and that person says 25 times. And the interviewer's eyes might get really big, and they might have this startled look on their face, and the person's going to say, oh boy, I think they kind of like that answer. Let's see how much of an answer I can give next time. Or you might have somebody say, boy, I just don't know if I want to be as honest with that. And so we can help minimize dishonesty, because interviewers are trained to tell when people are being honest or not. How do you think you can tell if a person isn't honest? They say that they will look away or they will look down. I think it's usually to the left. So there are ways to minimize dishonesty, because a person doing face-to-face interviews can help tell whether that person is being honest or not. Plus, face-to-face, you can interview people who can't read. Telephone interviews used to be a really popular way to gather data. However, not so much anymore with cell phones, because most who have cell phones, their numbers aren't published anywhere. So it would be hard to just randomly pick people to call. Although in the past when they did telephone interviews, that really wasn't a very valid way to gather data. Questionnaires are efficient, economical, and anonymous. However, it is hard to tell if people are honest, and we don't know if they can understand the questions because they can't ask questions about the question. Plus, if they can't read, then they can't fill out the questionnaire. Daily diaries would help increase accuracy. If I asked you, let's say you are sexually active, if I asked you how many times you had sex last month, if you had sex once, that would be easy, or if you had sex once a week, that'd be easy. But if it was more than that, you may not accurately remember. A more accurate way to do that would be to give you a diary and say, every time you have sex in the next month, please record it, and then give me the data. And not surprisingly, but the most surveyed groups in the United States have been college students, because they're a convenient group. You can just go into a class and do surveys with them. There are some gender differences on surveys when it comes to sexual research. They say that men report having more sexual partners, and if it's many, they'll probably round it up. If it's 4, it'll be 5. If it's 8, it'll be 10. Is that because men have poor memories? Probably not. I think it's just typical, it's just natural for men to say more when it comes to sexuality. And women may be more accurate, however, they may be more conservative. They may be more prone to under-reporting. Okay, here are some different types of studies that we could do. Case studies or clinical research. You all are a case study in your doctor's office. They're in-depth studies. Lots of data will be gathered in your file and kept throughout your life. However, case studies or clinical research often represent people with problems, because you usually go to the doctor for a problem. And then we have to ask ourselves, how accurate are the records? Did the doctor record the information accurately and in a timely manner? And if it wasn't timely, how good are their memories? And then, can they report accurately without any bias? Let's say you reveal to your doctor that you are gay, and your doctor has a real bias toward gay people, then they may not record your information accurately. Observational research. Going into a lab and doing the research. I always like to think of going into a daycare as I explain observational research. If you went into a daycare and sat down, and maybe we're going to watch children play to see if you could see if there were gender differences between the way that little boys played and little girls play, or maybe how they interact with one another. If you go in and sit down and start watching children play, what's going to happen? Yes, the children are going to come and ask you what you're doing, and they might want to sit and pretend they're recording data with you, so that'd be kind of hard to watch them play. You might think, oh, they'll play better if you're watching them. Not always. Some children act out just to get attention. The best way to do a lab setting is to have a one-way window. So you're looking in, you can see what's happening, but they don't know you're watching. Of course, you do need informed consent, especially children. You need the parents' consent to watch their children play and gather data. This is called a field study, where you're just going into the lab to gather data. Masters and Johnson were the first to record sexual data, observing people doing sexual things. This started in 1966, was not well received. People were very mean to them as researchers. They egged their homes and were They just thought it was horrible that they were doing this kind of research. It wouldn't be seen that way today, but in the 60s, even during the hippie era, as all of this was beginning to happen, it was seen in a negative light. They only had married couples participate in actual intercourse, but singles and gays participated in other types of behavior. They hooked people up to apparatuses and basically measured their sexual response biologically to gather data. Some limitations: the observer effect. Are you going to respond the same publicly as you would privately? Plus, if the observer has a bias, let's say you're watching a couple have oral sex, and if you do not think well of oral sex, then you would have a particular bias toward that. And should we pay people to come in and do these kinds of studies? I did learn that the first participants that Masters and Johnson had were prostitutes. Well, my question is a prostitute going to respond the same as somebody who is not a prostitute? Ethnosexual field study would be where you live among the people you're studying and observe their customs and behavior. Many of us went to high schools where we had foreign exchange students, where those students, they casually collected information about the culture they were living in. Ethnosexual is where they live among people and particularly study their sexual practices and beliefs. A correlational study is where you see if a relationship exists between different variables. You either have a positive or a negative correlation, and we have to remember that it doesn't cause it to happen, it just is a correlation. Let me give you some examples. If we want to know if viewing lots of pornography is going to give one a more positive or negative attitude toward that pornography, we could do that study. And as you can see, they did find it had a positive correlation. The more pornography one watched, the more positive attitude they had toward it. An example of a negative correlation: let's look at frequency of condom use. If you wear a condom all the time, are you going to have less or more incidence of gaining an STD? So as you can see, the more condom use, the less incidence of contacting a sexually transmitted disease. Okay, let's say that I really want to have a male child, and I've heard that if I drink lots of caffeine, I'll have a greater chance of having a baby boy. Well, as you can see, that would be no correlation. Caffeine does not affect whether you're going to have a male or female child. Experiments: a controlled experiment, you have to have an experimental group and a control group. The experimental group is going to have whatever you're looking at done to that group. The control group remains neutral. So we already know that sex can cure headaches. We learned that in class. But we also might wonder if Tylenol would cure a headache. So let's do a controlled experiment. The experimental group is going to get the Tylenol. The control group is going to get a placebo. And then we'll measure headaches. The independent variable is what is manipulated. The dependent variable is what is measured, or the outcome that is observed. Here's another study that we could do to do an experiment on. What are the effects of violent pornography on attitudes toward women? So we'll get our population, we'll randomly select our subjects, randomly put them in our groups. The experimental group is going to watch violent pornography. The control group is going to watch non-explicit sexual films. And then after they watch these videos, we're going to follow these men and see how they treat women. So the independent variable is the films, and the dependent variable is how they treat women. When doing research, we have to consider the reliability of the source. We want it to be reliable. If it's just a report in the newspaper, it may not be very reliable. But if the person that did the study wrote about it, then it enhances its opportunity to be reliable. The method used: did we do a face-to-face? Did we just do a pen and paper survey? Did we do an experiment? The number, remember, the more the better. How they were selected, randomly, hopefully, and then the design of the experiment or questionnaire. And when it comes to ethics of sex research, you have to have informed consent. We can't trick or force somebody. It has to be kept confidential. We can't expose children to erotic material, or we can't expose human fetuses to harm, so we couldn't do a study on how many women drank while they were pregnant. And then afterwards, we have to be willing to debrief people if they were affected by the study. The rest of the slides that you will have in your packet on this topic are just different studies, different researches that have been done.